Amar from the Yale Law School, and he wants to talk to you a little bit about the Constitution at this moment in time.
Nice to see you, Jason. Thank you for having me. 30 seconds. Constitution, I want to talk to you about the Constitution today, which has a double meaning. One meaning is what's happening right now. It's today. It's Thursday, but I also want to talk to you about a book of the Constitution Today that just came out. This is the pub week of the book, and I'm on book tour, which is why I'm a little, we're moving so fast. So this is a book about the constitutional issues of the last 20 years, the issues of our adult lifetime. And I bet you have some questions about Obamacare, gun control, Bush v. Gore, affirmative action, Citizens United, same-sex marriage, the exclusionary rule, filibuster reform, the Clinton impeachment, and the like. And this book is filled with essays that I've done over the last 20 years on those and related topics. So without further ado, in this tradition of Vic's introduction, I want to hear from you what it is that you are interested in hearing about, and we'll just have a conversation. So what do you want to hear about? Sure.
Voting rights.
Really important. Let's talk about several things. One thing we can talk about is why we have the Electoral College. See, because in a world of direct election, if North Carolina represses the vote, fewer North Carolinians are voting in North Carolina, therefore weighs less in the presidential sweepstakes. But in a world of electoral college, if they suppress the vote, they don't pay really an electoral college penalty. They get the same number of electoral votes, whether they make it easy to vote or hard to vote. So one question, which is ripped from the headline, since we are thinking about this presidential election in front of us, is why the heck do we have such a screwy thing called the Electoral College? And that's what one of these things, I was hoping someone would ask about right to vote. We can talk about that one. We can also talk about this one. These are, I love this picture. These are women. They are parading down Broadway. I was just in New York 2 days, yesterday morning, day before yesterday, yesterday morning. It's been really a whirlwind tour. And what are they marching for? They are marching for the right to vote. And in the founder's world, the Constitution says he, him, his when it comes to the presidency, and there's nothing that would have prevented North Carolina or New Jersey or any other state from passing laws saying, you know what, just for this election, we decided that actually women can't be on the ballot. Because that actually was, in effect, the law of North Carolina at the time of the Constitution, and New Jersey is the only place where women actually voted. And even if you could say the strong form is they can't be elected president, they're just ineligible because it says he, him, his. But I'm not making the strong form of the argument. I'm just saying even if they could be elected, they don't have a right to be on the ballot, a right to be voted for, a right to vote. And I believe they do today because the 19th Amendment isn't just about a right to vote. It's about a right to be voted for. This young man wrote a piece long ago about how the right to vote included a right to vote on a jury service as political participation akin to voting, about a right to vote in the legislature as well as for the legislature. Think about if you have a right to vote in a referendum, why shouldn't you have voting on laws? Why shouldn't you have an equal right to vote, let's say, in a legislature? So now the 19th Amendment means something a little bit more broad than at the founding. And so now we have a bunch of questions on the table. One is, how broad is the right to vote? I love this one. I only have a few, but you asked about the right to vote. Women are too sentimental for jury duty. anti-suffrage opponent, okay, argument. And you see that men can be sentimental too. This is right at the time that women's suffrage is on the ballot. What's this guy saying? This cartoonist, this is an elaborate constitutional argument in one image. When women get the vote, it's an anti-suffrage argument. Oh, women can't think about important things like guilty and not guilty, or Trump or Clinton, you see. And what this person is saying is, well, if women do get the vote, it will follow that they will vote on juries too. So now here are the questions on the table. Because you see, without that women's suffrage amendment, the women parading down Broadway with their baby strollers, and that was, I love that picture, but there's one problem with it. It was very, in a word, white. So that's another one. That's my lifetime. Another March on Washington. And they're parading for all sorts of things. Freedom, equality, integrated schools, anti-bias, decent housing, anti-police brutality. But they're also crusading for a Voting Rights Act. This is 1963, and they're going to get a Civil Rights Act in 64, and Voting Rights Act in 65. So here are the questions on the table, and I talk about them in some detail. Why didn't the original Constitution say rights to vote? And if you think this is unimportant, women's suffrage, let's say, I got 3 words for you. Because without women's suffrage, President Mitt Romney, he wins among the men. He just loses among the women. And it would be President Donald Trump pretty easily if women didn't vote. Because Trump is winning among the men. And without women on the Supreme Court, Obamacare is invalidated 4-2 rather than being upheld 5-4 because it's 3 women, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who are the margin of victory. And I called it Obamacare, but you could call it Pelosi-care, and I wouldn't quarrel with that. And that's because a female Speaker of the House got that through. So women's suffrage is a big deal. And black suffrage is a big deal. And so now here are the questions on the table. Why did the founders have the phrase right to vote in the Constitution? They didn't. It appears 5 times, but only when you take the amendments into account, not the original. 14th Amendment, Section 2, 15th Amendment, 19th Amendment, 24th Amendment, 26th Amendment. And why did the Supreme Court not understand this? And those amendments all end with the words Congress shall have power, 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, 26th. And yet the Supreme Court, 5-4, with the women in dissent, invalidated the major portions of the Voting Rights Act that these women and men actually laid their lives down for. They put themselves at risk at the Edmund Pettus Bridge and other places for. So why did the original Constitution not happen? And we amended it 5 times, and why does the Supreme Court not get it in Shelby County, which I consider one of the bigger disgraces of the modern era? And why did they have this weird electoral college system at the founding? And why do we still have it today rather than direct election, which is, if you know, it's not just about voting, but how the votes are counted, and why not just count them all equally? What's up with this whole thing? And in the book, The Constitution Today, I try to explain in a series of small pop essays for a general audience the answers to those and other questions. Let me just give a couple of answers now and then move on to another question. So why were you told that we didn't have, from Mrs. McGillicuddy in 8th grade, why we don't have a direct election of the president? Because you were told the same things I was, and I try to show why that's not true. Actually, the essays on the Electoral College, I have some of the essays were co-authored. The essays for that one were co-authored by a fellow named Vikram David Amar. I wonder what happens again. Why were you told that we have an electoral college? Because she told you stuff in 8th grade, I'm sure. She said, because it was a compromise between big and small states. Raise your hand if that's what you heard. Now here's the problem with that. America's never, ever, ever, ever since Philadelphia been divided with big states on one side, small states on the other. Big states have nothing in common Florida, California, New York, Texas. Small states are very different. Some are northern, southern, eastern, western. Some are even urban, some are rural. Rhode Island, Delaware, Wyoming, Montana, Alaska, actually quite different. You've never had really, if there was a big state, small state balance, they really were doofuses, because big state guy always wins. We've had 3 small state presidents in all of American history. Bill Clinton from Arkansas, Zachary Taylor, and Franklin Pierce from New Hampshire. That's it. You guys know, one part of your brain knows. George Washington is the first president. I promise you there's a part of your brain that knows that. And there's another part of your brain that knows that he came from Virginia. And there's another part of your brain that knows that Virginia is like the biggest state. And that's not just George Washington. That's Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. That's 8 of the first 9 presidencies, the biggest state. Big state guy always wins. And the other one is John Adams, and that's Massachusetts, and that's the 2nd or 3rd big state, depending on how you count. And that's John Quincy Adams too. So it's not big. You know how America divides? America divides. These are 2 actually maps. America divides north against south, coasts against the center, and this is also north against south twice. And this is, if you look at a county level, basically cities against the hinterland, and it's also coast against the center. It's a blue country. Actually, it's a red country on the ground. If you're a blue person, this is a little disturbing. Now, by the way, and now you know why. I spent my entire life here and here, and I get a little nervous. In the great state of Oklahoma. So, by the way, what's this one? This is a map. What year?
No, wait.
Oh wait, why isn't it 2012? You're right.
For Indiana.
Indiana was carried by Obama in 08, but not in 12. And North Carolina, Florida is different. So yeah, okay. Now, does the upper one look pretty similar? Yeah, Florida is close and North Carolina is flipped or something, but fairly similar, right? America divides the same way. That one's 1896. But here's the kick in the head. Blue on the top one, that would be the Republican Party. Red of the Democrat Party. The tall, skinny lawyer from Illinois named Lincoln. I think you've heard of him out here. He put together a northern coalition, Northern Party, and the tall, skinny constitutional lawyer from Illinois today wins the same states that the other tall, skinny lawyer from from Illinois won. Loses pretty much the same states. The real party of Lincoln is called today the Democrat Party, and the nominal party of Lincoln has become the party of Donald Trump and the Confederacy. And a significant percentage of them are deplorable. The alt-right, and you need to see what's happening in your country, and you understand where that came from. And all the, so it's not big versus small state. America's never divided big versus small state. Why is it? Why do we have the electoral college? Because they don't believe in democracy? Raise your hand. They have a filtered, system. Raise your hand. You were taught this. That's why we had electoral college. But no elector ever actually exercised independent judgment. They've always basically been told who to vote for from day one. And the framers put the Constitution to a vote, and they have a more democratic House of Representatives than had been true under the Articles of Confederation. They believe in direct election of governors. So that's not the real explanation either. Why do we have electoral college? One word. And Jason knows, of course, that he's being very polite. But those of you who haven't read my stuff or Vic's stuff on this, why do we have electoral college? One word. If James Carville were here, he would say it's blank stupid. It's slavery stupid. Because in a direct election world, the South loses every time because a massive percentage of its population are slaves. And slaves can't vote, obviously. But if you can count slaves, albeit at a discount, count them 3/5, well, and not just for the House of Representatives, but for the Electoral College, because the Electoral College vote is the number of seats you have in the House of Representatives plus 2 senators. Well, now you can start, now Virginia's looking pretty, because it's got a lot of slaves, and they don't vote, and who cares if people vote or not, but now they're going to get electoral votes. Pennsylvania has more free people in 1800 way more voters in 1800, way fewer electoral votes in 1800, which raises the question, should we have it today? And because we have it today, states they pay no penalty for making it hard for people to vote, because North Carolina's get same number of votes, electoral votes. Ohio's going to get the same number of votes, whether they make it easy for you to vote or hard for you to vote. Now, in a direct election world, state governments will have at the margin some incentives to make it easier for you all to vote, because then Ohio will be, more Ohioans will be voting, and more North Carolinians will be voting, and states would be competing against each other in interesting ways to make it maybe easier to vote. Same-day registration, voting as a state holiday, early voting, absentee voting. Employers have to pay you for your time off if you punch your. All sorts of federalism at its best, experimentation. Jason is going to like that I said something about state experimentation, and he cares about federalism and many other things. So okay, so that's just a little bit about and why does the Supreme Court not get it? And why don't they have the right to vote in the original Constitution? Because of slavery and race, and they can't quite agree on those things. And then we add it 5 times, and the Supreme Court doesn't get it. And why don't they get it? Because they weren't taught the way you're now being taught, that you have to pay a lot of attention, not just to the founding document, but to the later amendments. Okay. And a bunch of that's in this book, if you want it in very bite-sized form.
I'd like to hear about the topic that you said that you were going to talk about today, which was the effect of the election on the Constitution.
Yes, so the Constitution is at a crossroads right now. Really not since the age of Lincoln, so when he was alive, has there been a moment, as there is now, and maybe in the last election, but not really otherwise, in which all 4 branches of federal power are in play from a partisan point of view. A partisan point of view, the framers didn't explicitly provide for political parties, but soon enough they emerged, and the Constitution has been amended in various ways to facilitate a 2-party system. Sorry, Jill Stein. Sorry, Barry Johnson. It's a 2-party system that's actually built in, and if you don't understand that, well, then you're wasting your vote, and that's fine. You're allowed to do it. Lots of people in Florida did in 2000 when they voted for Ralph Nader, and then they woke up with an Iraq war. Because they said, well, Bush and Gore, they're the same. Well, really? Because I don't think Gore would have invaded Iraq. So they weren't the same. And just in case any of you is thinking about Jill Stein, or Gary Johnson, who doesn't even apparently know where Aleppo is. None of these people have been vetted. I would have said that they're, in any serious way, that they're sort of obviously incompetent, but then again, so is Trump. You see, we've never had a president before with no history of public service, counting the military public service, which of course it is. So, there are 2 parties, and there have been basically the same 2 parties built into our system and alternating power since a fellow named Lincoln, from, I can't remember where he was from, but there's some state that claims him. And when he's running in 1860, he can win the presidency, and he might be able to win the House and the Senate, but he's never going to carry the court in that first term, because the court, the ghost of presidents past, Andy Jackson's party has dominated America. 2 terms of Andy Jackson, and then Martin Van Buren, and then James Polk, and Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan. And yes, the anti-Jackson crowd sometimes wins, but then they die immediately. After a month, William Henry Harrison or the other Whig president, Zachary Taylor, dies. And so the court is overwhelmingly packed with with Jackson folks. Lincoln inherits the court 7-1, 7-2, 8-1 against him. He's not going to be able to change that in one term. The court is not on the ballot really in 1860. House is, Senate is, presidencies, even though they never won presidential election before, they've only been on a presidential election once before, in 1856. They're a fledgling new party, but they got a shot at the presidency and they win it. They got a shot at the House, they got a shot at the Senate, but the court's not in play. Now, 1864, everything is in play. Everything matters. That is the most momentous election until the one that's about to happen. Because now it really matters whether it's Abe Lincoln, or this narcissist from the Illinois candidate who believes in racial and religious equality, or this narcissist from New Jersey who's running against him, business person, owns a lot of casinos. No, he doesn't own casinos. George McClellan is as I described him, and he actually has contempt for Lincoln. And Lincoln isn't just great in death; he was great in life. You know, and if you were paying attention, you saw how impressive Abraham Lincoln was, because the tall, skinny constitutional lawyer from Illinois inherits the same coalition. There are these patterns in history. And 1864 is all up for grabs, because boy, the world is very different if you repudiate the tall, skinny lawyer from Illinois and you vote for this other party, this party basically of Southern like resentment. Because that's actually what McClellan copperheads. And McClellan, because now if Lincoln wins, the Republicans are going to control not just the presidency, but they could win that, keep House, keep the Senate, and control the judiciary. Everything was up for grabs, and thank God Lincoln won. And since then, basically, with the possible exception of the last election, because we didn't know what was going to happen with Justice Scalia in the court, you've never had all four up at the same time, up in play in a real way. House, Senate, presidency, judiciary. Why? Because Lincoln, his party wins the presidency again and again and again. The dominant political party in America commits suicide, Jackson's party, because of slavery, secession, segregation, and they're repudiated for 2 generations, 3 generations. No Democrat after Lincoln wins a popular majority until Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Garfield doesn't, Grover Cleveland doesn't win consecutively, never gets a popular majority, neither does Woodrow Wilson. And they're both pro-Southern in all sorts of ways. And so they're not going to have a realistic chance of filling the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court's stocked by all these Republican presidents. You're never going to turn the Supreme Court if you're not sort of winning consistently in the presidency. So the Supreme Court's not in play until FDR. By the time FDR wins, the Supreme Court isn't in play in 1932, because the Democrats really, again, has like 2 people out of 9 in his first term, and he gets no vacancies. Eventually, he gets a bunch of vacancies, and the court's in play, but by that point, the Congress is no longer in play. The Democrats overwhelmingly control. And there's a little window under Eisenhower when maybe everything seems to the House and the Senate might be in play, and the court is now more balanced because Ike has been able to stock it. But Eisenhower beats this fellow from Illinois. He whoops him in the rematch, which is when it begins to get close on the Supreme Court, by 15 points. This fellow named Stevenson, Allen Stevenson. So the presidency really isn't in play under Eisenhower. By the end of the Eisenhower administration, the Democrats are back to overwhelming New Deal control of the Congress. 2-to-1 margins in the House or Senate or both. That's Jack Kennedy, that's Lyndon Johnson. For these elections, the Congress isn't in play. There may be Southern Democrats, but the partisan control isn't. The Democrats are going to control the Congress under Jack Kennedy, under Lyndon Johnson, under Richard Nixon, under Gerald Ford, under Jimmy Carter, under Ronald Reagan, under George H.W. Bush. So, not in play. The Congress becomes in play after Clinton is elected with the Gingrich Revolution in 1994. But Clinton's not going to be able in 1996 to control the Supreme Court. There are Republican appointees. When he begins, I think there are 8 Republican appointees on the court. Now, some of them are liberal Republicans, Harry Blackmun, for whom Vic Clerk and David Souter and John Paul Stevens and Anthony Kennedy. But from just a partisan control point of view, the Supreme Court's been controlled by Democrats Republicans for my entire adult lifetime. Since 1970, they've had a lock on the Supreme Court. And now it's in play because Justice Scalia is no longer with us. It was 4-4. And maybe it was in play when Obama was up for re-election in 2012. Maybe that, but only 2012 and definitely today. Is it because this is why it's so terrifying, not just because it's Donald Trump, who I think is anathema to all the constitutional principles that I hold dear, like religious equality, for example, and freedom of speech. It's not just that. It's that even if you don't share my view about that, it's really exciting because come January, the Democrats possibly could control everything. Hillary Clinton could win, and she could carry the Senate if Tammy Duckworth wins in this state against Kirk, and a few other things happen. And if that happens, she will definitely control the Supreme Court, and it could be Merrick Garland from this state. And that's now partisan control for the Democrats. They'd have, for the first time since 1970, a majority on the Supreme Court. It's even possible she could carry the House. That's within the realm of possibility as I speak to you today, Constitution today. Or, it could be President Trump, Republican, and he'll carry the Senate presumably, and therefore it will clearly be a Republican-dominated Supreme Court, basically for the rest of, our careers. And they're going to carry the House pretty easily. If that would happen, just that'd be unlikely. So, or something in between. And that's interesting, and that hasn't really happened since Lincoln walked here.
How much could Trump really open up the libel laws without running around with the First Amendment?
Well, I just don't know what he would do or try to do. He's never held public office before. Presidents have all sorts of power. They suppose someone told him you can defy a Supreme Court order. Now, libel law is typically state law. He has appointments to the court. I don't think he said here are some people, but I don't think he has any real clue about what law is. And even if he does nothing in America, the message he is sending to the rest of the world, it doesn't have New York Times versus Sullivan, about how a great democracy operates, it's a terrible one. Because we have been a light unto the world for religious toleration, for freedom of discourse, for racial equality and the right, and protecting voting rights, for example. We haven't always been true to our best selves, but I'm worried about what happens not just in America, but in the world. I'm worried right now about the rise of religious intolerance in France today, with Sarkozy sounding a lot like Le Pen, and the rise of certain sort of alt-right folks in Germany in the last 3 weeks. Okay, so it's not just America that we have to be thinking about. We have to be thinking about our leadership role in the world. I'm worried about whether NATO is actually hangs together because of a commitment to an alliance of democracies, or whether it becomes some sort of protection racket in which if you don't pay your dues, basically, we don't, we're not there when you need us, and indeed we start saying, we get to invade countries and grab their oil or something. Nice little country you got here. Be a shame if something happened to it. That's a very different vision than Barack Obama's vision of the world, which is frankly Hillary Clinton's and Joe Biden's and John Kerry's. She's a generic Democrat. Perhaps, you might say there's more corruption there for some of the other Democrats, and you might be right that I don't want to, adjudicate that. But she's a pretty just basically mainstream. She's in the same tradition as Obama, Biden, Kerry, Kaine. And we've never seen anything like him before, because he is not in the same tradition as W and H.W. And McCain and Romney and Jeb and John Kasich. I could go on and on. He's not in that tradition. She's not very different, really, from the other Democrats. Yeah.
How can you make such a statement? Given her role as Secretary of State, the destruction of Libya, the destruction that is taking place right now in Syria, Yemen, Obama has not only continued the wars that Bush started, he has expanded them. We're now in war with 2 nations. I came here to hear you speak about freedom of speech. You're campaigning for the Democrats.
I'm exercising freedom of speech, and you're free to disagree.
Yes, you are, and I am. And I listened to you on NPR yesterday, supporting our constitutional lawyer as a president, in spite of the fact that he has not only broken international law, he has broken our laws.
Well, I respectfully disagree. You're entitled to your view.
You're welcome.
And if the rest of you can't be experts on this, I'll be blunt with you. You have to actually pay, you have to, and this is what this book is about. You have to sometimes decide who's credible on things, what their track records are, and I say, this book tries to show you that I have a pretty good track record in constitutional law. These are things that were published 20 years ago, and I say certain things, and I think history has, my positions have aged pretty well. Here's what I do want to say. anyone who actually governs and is serious is going to be trying to actually solve problems. And when you try to solve problems, at your very best, you'll solve them imperfectly, and you'll create all sorts of other problems. And sometimes even the problems that you create are almost as bad as the ones you solved. And welcome to the world. That's actually what governing is about. That's just what life is in general about. I tend to favor people with experience, in part because they have made mistakes, and if they're wise, they learn from their mistakes. And that's true of George Washington, because I studied George Washington in great detail. And that's true of Abe Lincoln, because I've studied Abe Lincoln in great detail. I actually am a presidential scholar, and Abe Lincoln has all sorts of problems of the same sort Obama has. I'm willing to defend that, and I have an essay called Remembering Lincoln that appeared on the 150th anniversary of his death, and I show you all sorts of uncanny parallels between the tall, skinny constitutional lawyers in Illinois. So as an historian, I try to look at and see if there are patterns in history. And Abe Lincoln is by not remotely the most progressive person in this era. Not remotely. He's not an abolitionist. He says he doesn't want slavery in the territories, but he's not going to do anything about slavery in the states. And he promises actually a constitutional amendment that will guarantee a right of states to have slavery in perpetuity, the Corwin Amendment. He makes all sorts of compromise. He's not the most progressive guy. He has to do all sorts of things to win that war. But he is the most liberal, egalitarian person who could ever be elected president of the United States, because politics is the art of the possible. And I hold him in awe. If you come to my office at Yale, you will see George Washington, who killed a lot of people, and people died under him, and made tons of mistakes, tons. And you'll see Abraham Lincoln, tons of mistakes. But Lincoln was so vastly better than the opposition candidates who ran against him both in 1860 and in 1864. So vastly better. Who talked a good game, but it's very easy to just wait for mistakes to be made and say you could do something better when you've never actually done anything successful, really, in the art of government, which is very difficult to do. So I believe that, so let's take, Libya's a disaster. Libya's a disaster after we intervened, and if we hadn't intervened, it would have been a disaster. Gaddafi was a butcher, and his sons were about to take power. And here's what I can tell you. Iraq's a disaster, and it's not one that Obama created. I don't even blame Hillary so much, because I generally think that when you're in the Senate, you don't have as much access to information as the president, and in any close case, it actually makes sense to defer to the president of the United States. He's the one that has the intel, the foreign connections. So in Iraq, we spent trillions of dollars, and we probably made the thing worse. And lots of people died. And in Libya, we did spend trillions of dollars. There were no American body bags, except for 6 months later, 5 people in an embassy in Benghazi, who were actually Hillary Clinton's very close friends. So 6 people, hundreds of thousands of people. No money, trillions of dollars. This is your choice, There are 2 parties, and we've had 2 parties for 150 years, and which party drove the economy over the cliff, and which one did. So I will defend the Obama legacy. Here's what he said he's going to do, and here's what Lincoln says: I'm going to resist the spread of slavery, and he does it. And he says, I'm going to resist unilateral secession, and he does it. And I think those are great things, and he was true to them. Obama says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to, as best we can, get us out of these 2 wars. And by the way, what that means when we cut and run, we're going to cut and run. And you voted for that, I voted for that, and I knew that the place was going to go to hell if we cut and ran. Let's be adults. By the way, if we had stayed, the place, in my view, would still have gone to hell, and there'd just be a lot more people dead on our side. Okay. But he got us out, pretty much. He says, I'm going to try to close down Guantanamo. He's doing his best. Actually, Congress isn't letting him do stuff, but he says, I'm going to improve unemployment. Ooh, I'm gonna, I know we gotta go very soon, I'm gonna bring the stock market back. I have a portfolio, it's way back. If I have a clean shot at Osama bin Laden, I will take it. And he had even not a great clean shot, but he took it, and good for him. He said, I will give you a health care plan because it's a disgrace that tens of millions of Americans don't have that. And that's not a perfect system at all, but I think it's better than actually what we had before. So I think he's basically done what we elected him and re-elected him. He said, I'm going to actually make a pivot toward Asia. And he's trying to do that. He said, I'm going to actually try to engage our moral foes in the world, even the Iranians, even the Cubans, because we have to move forward. And I think he's basically did what he said he was going to do. And he's basically saying, give me a third term, and I'm willing to give you a third term. And she's called Hillary.
Well, on that, we have to get going to camp, so I want to thank everybody for coming. This is exactly the kind of spirit